Chair Tate.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move down to item number 3, the approval of minutes for July 19th, 2021 and July 26th, 2021. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes in a second?
Mr. Chairman, it's the director.
Yes.
May I ask that we move the approval of minutes to the next meeting? The minutes were not prepared in time for the meeting.
Confirmed. Okay, so with that with that being said, we're going to skip down to item number 7 on our agenda, which is new business. We're going to start with A, which is 318-330 Main Street, First Presbyterian Church. This is a plan and review for adaptive reuse of the church and ancillary buildings. This is presented by CTS Architects on behalf of New Jersey Community Development Corporation. Executive Director, do you have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, I do.
Thank you. Proceed.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by introducing this application by showing a couple of letters on the screen. It seems like 20 years ago, actually, because it's 2021 now, and you can see that the date on the letter on screen is December 2001. It's literally 20 years ago. We received a certificate of eligibility from the New Jersey State Historic Preservation Office, signed by the Historic Preservation Officer, informing that the certificate of eligibility was now in place for this site, the First Presbyterian Church, and it had been nominated for National Register inclusion. The National Register nomination was pretty good, but there were some items that were missing, and the SHPO was working with the nominator to kind of complete the file, and it didn't happen. So the building all this time had not been entered onto the National Register. It does mention here, though, at the bottom paragraph that the church, the church complex in the configuration that it's in now was first built in 1850, and gives some notes about what's also contributing to this site. It says here where my cursor is, also contributing to the church or chapel, Memorial Hall, the church and its associated buildings have played a significant role in the community relating to the social history and education of its members and others in Patterson. So I wanted to point out this document as to how long the recognition of the site has been in the works for designation. And a while later, here's our memorandum or a letter dated May 26, 2015 to the Presbytery, congratulating them that we had completed a local designation of this site as of January 2015 and had gone through all of its requisite approvals from the Preservation Commission to the Planning Board and up to the City Council, and it was enthusiastically supported by the congregation that was occupying the complex at the time, the Iglesia Veriana Church, that I understand is no longer at the site and hasn't been for a while now. So the site was placed on the municipal register. It has an eligibility for both the for individual listing on both the national and state registers. As part of the designation process, of course, I prepared a staff report to the commission, and we nominated this based on almost all of the 10 criteria because it just it's just dripping with significance, not only architecturally but also socially, with some very wonderful highlights to be noted here in further down. This is a very old congregation, as you can see on screen. This congregation was first acquired the property from the SUM starting in 1813, and this would be right around the period of the War of 1812. So construction of a church building started then and was completed by 1819. Again, very, very early. But over the years, there were several fires, and it was in October of 1850 that, a large fire consumed the frame building that had been erected for, had been on the site for a number of years. And this sort of prompted the installation or erection of the brick edifice. So it was put together in this Romanesque revival style, and I'm not going to give a complete detailing of this because I think that our team members will be presenting a bit about the architectural style and some of the background of the church. I really wanted to sort of point out, however, some of the social context here that I thought we might want to just keep in mind. And this is sort of down toward, I'm going through this, putting this on screen so people can see, the church held its first, let me see if I can find it here, I'm sorry. It's associated with the Hobart family, and of course we've heard of Jenny Tuttle Hobart, who gave the gifts of the Memorial Day Nursery to the city of Patterson. The Henry Bacon Building was erected around the turn of the century in honor of her daughter and her husband that passed away. She was also very instrumental in some of the activities at this church, and specifically also this church has credit for one of the first Sunday schools and an education program in Patterson and in the state of New Jersey, in fact. So I would like to sort of point some of those facts out and then go on to the memos and the paperwork that was circulated in your pre-meeting packet about our application this evening for the adaptive reuse of the First Presbyterian Church at 320 Main Street in Patterson. I want to sort of recollect that I came to work in Patterson in 2005, and this is one of the first couple of issues that I had to deal with was this church complex and also St. Michael's. And one was of course, the Presbytery, and one was the Catholic Church, the Catholic Diocese. And both were calling for the same reason. They both were asking about, how to demolish these buildings, how to actually get them out of their inventory, and what it would take to get the approvals for demolition. As we know, St. Michael's went through not only a period of being sort of saved from demolition, but went forward into a interior renovation campaign, and then later the commission reviewed and then looked over a facade rehabilitation campaign and put a lot of the water infiltration and damages that were happening at the building into check, and the building is now, from what I understand, safe and sound and progressing. CTS Architects, the presenters this evening, were also the architectural team on the St. Michael's project. This is a number of years ago now, actually, and I'm very glad to see that the New Jersey Community Development Corporation has brought them forward, and they are also involved now in the saving of and adaptive reuse programming of this site. So after all these years, it's been 15 years that the First Presbyterian Church has sort of been in balance. I'm very pleased to see this application coming before us. This is a planning application. The commission and our presenters are very familiar with the difference between a planning application and a design review application. This is an anticipation of going to the planning board for a site plan approval for the different aspects of the project that you're going to see in the presentation. So we do review some topics of preservation here. It's important that we get a sense of the overall thrust of the project, not only the adaptive reuse, the uses that are being proposed, but also the preservation treatments and methodologies. Any additions or removals also are things that we talk about here. To some degree, we talk about them lightly because I think the commission probably understands, and so does CTS, having been to the commission several times for planning reviews in the past, understands that this isn't the full design review, that we should make sure that we limit our questions to kind of keep the preservation questions basic, and we'll be able to revisit them in more detail during the design review. But going back to the memo on screen, I'd like to commend the CTS group for, especially, Brian and David, who are going to be presenting in a few minutes. This very thorough application, not only from the letter of intent, but also in the planning review application that was distributed to the commissioners. So if everyone had a chance to take a look at this, these materials, you'll be well along the way to a basic understanding of what you'll see in the presentation. This is some of the depth of information that was provided and was signed by Brian Compertor here. So with that said, I put the four corners on the application. This is a planning review, and I've given some background on the designation and significance of the site. I know that the gentlemen have a lot to tell us, and they're going to share photos, and they're going to share more about the site itself. So I'd like to conclude my report here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director, for your thoughtful introduction. At this time, I'd like to invite the applicant to come forward to be sworn in with our legal for testimony.
This is Bob Durashi, and I'm prepared to be sworn in.
All right, thank you. Maita?
Yes, I'm here. Is anybody else going to be sworn in?
Yes, my colleagues Michael Cassidy, David Abramson, and Brian Compertor from CTS Architects, and Richard Pellizzoni from French and Perlo.
In an effort to save time for everyone, I'm going to swear everybody in. At that time, I'm going to ask all individuals to raise your right hand on this application. I'm going to ask, and at the end, just say that you, or indicate that if you do, and give your full name. Did all the parties raise their right hands? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Bob Durashi.
I do.
Yes,
I do.
Yes, David Abramson.
I do. Brian Compertor.
I do, Richard Pellizzoni.
Thank you, gentlemen, and nice seeing you again, Mr. Qureshi.
Thank you. Thank you, John Franco, and thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to be here this evening. Back in 2014, NJCDC was approached by the Presbytery of the Palisades. They had heard about our work in rehabilitating historic properties here in Patterson, and wanted to know if we would be able to do that with this particular church. And 5 years of conversations with the Presbytery culminated in our purchasing this beautiful church in February of 2019. It is a wonderful opportunity for adaptive reuse, of one of the oldest churches in Patterson. Our intent is to convert it into what we call the Patterson Youth Arts Center. As you'll hear, there's a preservation plan that was created that led to funding from the New Jersey Historic Trust. Other funding will be coming from the Great Falls Historic District Tax Credit Initiative. Altogether, this will be a $10 million project. And so we are happy to be here tonight to present our project to you and certainly to answer any of your questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to David Abramson of CTS Architects to begin the presentation.
Hey, David, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and shut off my screen sharing
Okay.
so that you can put your presentation on the screen.
John Franco, I'm gonna share my screen and David will just talk about, the slides that I'm showing.
Okay, that's fine. Please proceed, Brian.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to present our project for the Patterson Youth Arts Center. A really incredible, I think very exciting adaptive reuse. Before we talk a little bit about the history and then much more about the proposal itself, I want to provide a little background. We've been involved over the years with NJCDC on a number of significant adaptive reuse projects and restoration projects here in Patterson and others in Patterson, as John Franco indicated. And we were very excited when they approached us, when Bob and Mike approached us in 2017 with the possibility of working with them. And at that time, it was to consider preparing a historic preservation plan, for which they were preparing an application to the New Jersey Historic Trust. So from that 2017 date, we continued to discuss and plan, and in 2018 commenced work on the historic preservation plan. The trust received the grant, the NJCDC received the grant from the New Jersey Historic Trust. The historic preservation plan is a process meant to envision in a holistic way the successful reuse or use and restoration of the historic properties. It involves consideration of history, of the physical fabric, of reuse potential, of building conditions, of site, and we prepared a detailed plan, which I believe was conveyed to John Franco about a year and a half ago. I'm hoping it was John Franco. It has formed the basis of our work. I'll describe a little bit when I start describing the work, but essentially the plan envisioned a couple phases. The first, which we call phase one, was to make the buildings watertight, to deal with structural issues, to deal with potential issues that could lead to accelerated building deterioration, but it does not include a comprehensive exterior restoration at this time. What it also includes is a complete new systems for an adaptive reuse, which could make the building function for the 21st century and for the community. A little bit about the history. John Franco told you the congregation was founded in 1813. Interestingly, they hired a Dr. Hooper Cummings as the first minister, and when he and some parishioners, along with his wife, went up to the falls where their house was going to be located, his poor wife, quote, fell off the cliff. There were rumors at the time about whether she fell or whether she was pushed, but that was the beginning of the congregation back in 1813. The first church building was erected in 1814. Brian, next. And if you see on the left, this is back. Brian, back.
Back.
If you see on the left, the from 1835. Nope, going too far back. Sorry. On the map, and to the left is the location of the original church on an 1835 map. That church burned, and in 1852, the existing church or sanctuary, which is on the north end of the site next to Ward Street, on the right, you'll see a completed 1915 map. In 1886, some meeting house and associated structure was destroyed, or mostly destroyed by fire. The current chapel and fellowship hall were built, and then in 1906, Memorial Hall, which links the two, all at different levels, was constructed, and that's the site plan which you see in the map of 1915. Next, Ryan. In the next slide, you'll see a series of drawings from this early 20th century. Next. And 3 images from the 19th, the late 19th century, and finally one taken in the 60s, showing the church in most of them and the completed aggregated structures. The church on the left, that's on the right, that's the north. The Chapel Memorial Hall on the south, and Chapel Fellowship Hall on the south, and Memorial Hall on the center. Next one, please. We're going to walk around the site now. As John Franco mentioned, these are really superb examples of Romanesque revival architecture. 2 of the really important character-defining features which we find in all the buildings, no matter that they're constructed over a period of almost 60 years, the round arches with labeled hoods, some corbelling, and the arcuated cornices that you see here at the gable end of the chapel, which we're looking at from the south-west corner. We're going to walk around. Next, Ryan. The site, this is on Main Street, looking from the east at the chapel, and then the continuation of the Fellowship Hall. Next, brick architecture, stone trim. Here you look at the north end and the east-facing side of the Fellowship Hall, Memorial Hall, just coming over into view. They did a very nice job when they connected these buildings. In fact, the entrances into Memorial Hall are in these sort of flanking slits that you see set back from the main facade. The windows are original, dating in the case of Chapel Fellowship Hall to the 1886 work and 1906 Memorial Hall. Next. These are some of the details that are problematic and which we will be fixing in this first phase of the work. There's some destabilization. There's displacement of brick. There's some deterioration significant here in the lobby of the chapel off of Main Street. Next. And we have issues with the limited remaining amount of slate roof up on the top of the chapel and the deteriorated brownstone, as you see here on the right. Next, please. This is Memorial Hall, 1906. Continuing the decorative features, the arches, the drop labels, and the arcuated cornices, but classicizing the building with a concrete base and with cast concrete or cast stone, classical features in the cornice at the upper portions of the building, as well as in the lintels over the windows. Again, here you get a perfect view of the 2 recessed entries for Memorial Hall. None of the, quote, first floors of the buildings quite align. They don't. One of the things which we're proposing is a central new entryway which will provide accessibility and barrier-free accessibility to an elevator, which will interconnect the buildings and provide access through a secure entrance to all of the buildings instead of the multiple locations which exist now, for actually 5 separate locations. Next, please. Looking at the back, this is Memorial Hall. This is on Yancey Street. Again, you see the concrete base, brick above it, with the arches. Okay, next. These are a couple shots of detailed issues. There's destabilization and displacement, similar to what we saw at the chapel. This is on the north end, on the west elevation of Memorial Hall. and there's significant damage to the concrete, the reinforcing, if it's there. We haven't done destructive probes. Looks like it's been rusting, causing a series of this sort of cracking throughout the facade. And we have a proposal. Our proposal includes addressing this with both repair work and a remedial coating over it. Next, please. This is the church, 1852, with incredible stained glass windows, all of which will be retained. Significant work will be on the tower and some related areas. Next, please. This is the east elevation looking from the north and the northwest. You'll see the sides and the rear as the tower rises above the intersection of Ward and Main Street. Next. These are some of the details that are there. Significant deterioration at the tower, which is will be addressed. Broken and or missing gutters. I want to point out that the entire roof surface of the church, which is probably about 50% of the roofing of the building, is asphalt shingles. It was changed that way at least 30 years ago, 25 or 30 years ago. Next, please. And these are some of the details at the front. That is the lobby, the north, the east entry of the church. You have significant deterioration of brick elements that have already been rebuilt once. This is replacement brick. It wasn't done well. There's been water penetration on the roof behind, and we will be disassembling and rebuilding this element on the lobby facade. Next, please. Vestibule facade. And finally, this is the rear elevation, the west elevation with the apse. Next, please, Brian. There's a look overhead, a good look at the site plan as it exists. North is to the right, where we have Ward Street. East is below, which is the front of all of the buildings. Next. Our site plan proposes in the dark the new one-story plus partial basement, new centralized entry to link all the buildings, new replacement paving on site, some of it slightly different in configuration for the new orientation, new paving around three of the facades. Back please, Brian. Three of the facades. The paving on Ward Street is the state put in as part of the Ward Street work and will remain that way. We will be replacing the paving, as I said, 3/4 of it, and fencing with new secure 6-foot fencing, decorative fencing, and doing landscape work, not heavy, retaining some of the major trees that are there, eliminating the dead ones, and some of those, getting rid of the bushes, the ornamental bushes that were planted closer to the building. We haven't developed a detailed plan. There'll be regrading, of course, also to deal with some of the ponding and other problems that are out there now. Next. I'd like to walk you very briefly through the plan. This is the basement, again, to the north is to the left, which we have the crawl space of the church. Right is the chapel and fellowship hall, mostly unexcavated, but a small area of basement. Memorial Hall does have a floor there, which we're proposing as a lunch facility with service area to the rear up against Chianti, with the existing boiler room there too. The blue is the new area in the basement to accommodate the toilet facilities. We're trying to aggregate toilet facilities that are spread and have been added over many, many decades throughout the building, trying to aggregate them in a central location, again, to serve that central entry and to focus the entry, toilets, etc., at the front of the building. Next, please. This is the first floor with a simple look. We have some other renderings to show you in greater detail. First floor connecting the three separate buildings. There'll be an elevator introduced in Memorial Hall. You can see that. That's the sort of X there that will link all the levels of the facility. The church, which will be a flexible, multi-purpose performance space. Those are new chairs which will be removable to accommodate a variety of needs. There'll be a bookstore or something similar directly behind the entry in Memorial Hall, and interactive exhibit space in the chapel and fellowship hall to the south, that is to the left. Next. This is a look at the second floor plan. There's only one second floor. There's a little bit of a balcony in the church, which will be retained. It's been converted at this point. It's offices. We look to have a STEM space up on the second floor. You also can get a look here at the fellowship hall. There's a valley not visible from the street where we propose to locate a number of the air handling units and condensers which are required. We will have new HVAC. There is none now in the building. Next. Finally, it's the roof plan. And this is a good look at the three roofs. The church roof, which is all asphalt shingle, will remain as is. We're doing work at flashings and gutters. The flat roofs of the Memorial Hall will be replaced with new insulated insulation and roofing. There's been a series of leaks there over the years. For the chapel and Memorial Hall and Fellowship Hall to the south, facing Oliver Street, that area has already been asphalt shingles for about 25 years. It will stay that. The rest of the areas are deteriorating slate shingle. We need to remove a significant portion to do new gutter work and create water tightness along the perimeters of all there. But additionally, we'll discuss it a little later, the chapel and fellowship hall were built structurally unstable. And the existing trusses or the trusses built then had to be reinforced. There's already new, that is later, brick piers that have been introduced on the south end of the chapel. We will be doing that on the east side of the fellowship hall. These walls are out of plumb, unstable. They need to have additional lateral support, and our goal is to also reduce the roof load as much as possible to lighten the load on the building and lessen the structural instability. Next, please. I'm going to walk quickly around the building and just look at this one here. Go ahead, Brian. Next. This is a look from the east with a look at the proposed work. All of the work that's highlighted, in outline areas is work that's proposed. A lot of it at the copings, flashings. You see here over on Fellowship Hall, we're installing new brick piers. That's what I mentioned to aid in the structural stability and reinforce what's now not a plumb wall, and replace the roofing on that area. Next, Brian. Here's a look at the overall with a look at the proposed addition. We have a low brick wall to provide similar material to what exists everywhere around there, but then a glazed wall, which is fairly typical in the approach to creating the new with the existing. We want the existing features to show as much as possible through the building, to be able to see the openings and the materials all of which will be retained in the new lobby. Next. Another look from the northeast of the lobby, as it fits very nicely in between the recessed Memorial Hall and the Fellowship Hall. Next. And one looking from above, again, appropriately set back from the main elements, which still are very prominent, but will provide us the kind of central, accessible, secure entry, which is important. That's fine, Brian. Go ahead. Take additional walk and looking at some additional work now. Here's where the gutter will be. Go ahead, Brian, next. Gutter will be replaced, and other work. You can see it on the upper drawing here, and this is the lower drawing is of the south elevation of the chapel. Next. And here's the chapel, and here I had mentioned this roofing here, by the way, is all asphalt shingle, and the three piers that you see there are similar to what we'll be now adding on the east. They were all added. We don't know the date to accommodate the excessive deflection in the wall and to support added structural tie rods that supplemented the insufficient trusses that were there to begin with. Next. This is the west elevation, long elevation. It's on Chianci. It's really not seen from many locations because Ward Street is significantly below this, and Oliver Street terminates in a cul-de-sac. We have work on a fair number of the areas here, most particularly at the deteriorating brownstone, at windows, at belt courses, at sills, and then at the concrete, as well as work up at the cornice areas of the Memorial Hall, a new apse roof, and then work at the towers, as I mentioned earlier. Next. Here's another good look at Memorial Hall. You can see here, all of the buildings, by the way, were painted at one time or another. They were repointed and painted. And what you see here very clearly is the red paint running off the building and staining the concrete below. So there's a mixture of paint, modestly painted surfaces now. One of the things that we did in our historic preservation plan, and we will be following through during the work, is call for a series of investigations, mortar sampling, paint sampling, probes at the deteriorated areas, all of which we'll undertake once we move to the next phase of design after a planning board and preservation commission hearings. Next. Finally, just want you to take a look at the some sections that we've shown through the building. The lower right section is of the church, where we will be retaining the existing arched elements that are in there. The sanctuary will remain as it is. The upper right and lower left show sections, or lower left shows sections through the Memorial Hall. The real significant one is over on the upper left, the Chapel Fellowship Hall, and also the upper right. There have been hung ceilings hiding mechanical, electrical equipment, and a lot of repairs for many, many decades. Next, we proposed, as part of ours, and these are two shots, this incredible view to the left shows the arched Steamwood ceiling that's there now, that's been hidden for decades under the acoustic tile grease ceiling. It also shows damage to the hammer beam truss. We'll be repairing that and opening this all up. It also shows you some tie rods. Those were the ones that were installed installed, inserted at some later date, and which necessitated the introduction of the piers, which we saw on the south. Next. So we conclude with a look at the facility after our proposed work with significant exterior restoration to make the building watertight, structurally stable, and to eliminate those areas where there's accelerated deterioration, and the introduction of a appropriately designed, compatible, one-story entry, which will provide central, secure, accessible access to the newly adapted youth arts center. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Does that conclude the applicant, or is there anyone else speaking?
I think at this point, it concludes it, and we are certainly open for questions. Thanks very much for asking.
Okay, I want to thank you for your very comprehensive report, and at this time, I'd like to invite our commissioners to ask the applicant questions about the testimony that was given. Please raise your hand, and the executive director will reach you accordingly.
Okay.
I see Rich's hand up.
Yes, my hand is up. I like the overall plan, but my only question is on the new entranceway. Are there going to be any new entry doors within that foyer going into the building, or are you going to use the existing doors?
The existing doors, to the extent that they're code compliant, will be retained. That's our goal. We're still having to confirm it. They will likely remain open, in an open position, to permit the appropriate means of egress. Each one of them is slightly smaller than 3 feet. That's the issue.
Okay, but no major changes to the penetration of the building.
No, the changes to the penetration will be at the through the front wall to get access to the elevator, and then there will be some at the basement level.
Oh, okay. All right, well, that's design review stuff, but yeah, that's going to be a lot of questions on that. Okay.
Okay, I mean, the basement area, which is a less significant area, we provided so that there's movement through the main space into it, access from there. I think when you have your design review, I think you'll be able to see that it's well thought out, and we feel very appropriate. But certainly, please look.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
This is the executive director. I'm sorry, this is the chair. I have a question for you. I noticed on your presentation. First of all, I commend you guys for rehabilitating this beautiful church and the purpose of giving it back to the city and the youth. You guys are upgrading the systems within the building, and if you go to kind of the existing facades at certain locations, I can't recall if it was a chapel. There's like through window ACs and all that. So you guys are completely eliminating that from the scope, and you guys are replacing it with like a central air system. I just wanted to confirm that from a visual perspective.
Absolutely, that's our goal.
Okay, that's what I have for now. Commissioners, do we have any additional questions regarding what was just presented by our applicants? I see, Rich, your hand is up. Is it another question or?
Sorry, I didn't lower it.
I have a question. This is Commissioner Simpson.
Proceed, please.
I just wanted to know if the sidewalks are part of the project, rehabilitating the sidewalks.
Yes, the proposal is to replace the sidewalks on the three of the sides.
Thank you.
Or Ward Street side, yes.
This is the chair again. With this particular project, do you foresee any, huge impact on like traffic circulation or anything like that, considering maybe something that's outside of our scope? I'm trying to keep it more so broad because I understand that you guys will be back for a much more refined review in the future for just, architectural detailing and things of that nature.
Mike or?
Yeah, hi, evening commissioners, this is, Mike Cassidy from NJCDC. I think, we're definitely aware that having a fully functioning, facility back at this location will increase traffic. For a long time, there hasn't been, a very, the congregation was dwindling and lessening in size. So there hasn't been a lot of traffic to this site for a long time. And of course, it's our interest to have a fully functional and vibrant, youth serving facility. And so we have done the work with our site plan engineer and architect to come up with parking calculations that we'll be reviewing at the planning board when we go to the planning board. That's the best way that I can think to address that question, Commissioner. But by all means, if you have follow-ups, I could offer more input.
No, I think that addresses it. I mean, Main Street, as you know, and that Ward Street where it comes off of the highway, those two streets are pretty important vessels in this district. And I was just curious, like, kind of, slightly off of the design, but, it was just kind of one of those things that I'm sure will go into the planning board considerations. But thank you. Your answer addresses it, and there's only so much that we can discuss on this particular aspect of the design. I see Commissioner Corbo's hand.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you for your presentation. I think this is a wonderful project, and I love the rendering and the addition that you put in. I think works well with the building and puts a focus on the original building. But my question is involving the roof that you'll be repairing. How much of the slate or all will we be losing on the roof?
Well, the existing slate area we're proposing to replace. Significant area is damaged, other has to be removed for the gutter work, which probably totals about 35%. Once you get to that extent, really need to replace. But what's driving the replacing then with the asphalt shingles is the need to reduce the weight. You've seen the structural add-ons that have already occurred. We need to do more because of the severe out of plumb of the walls, and we where we can, we're really trying to reduce the loads on these walls as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, my hand is up again. This is Rich. I just we talk about the busing and the traffic there. I just want to keep in mind busing. If they're going to be dropping anybody off buses, it's not that much room on Main Street.
Hi, Rich. This is Mike Cassidy again from NJCDC. That is a good point. Thank you. There's actually an existing drop-off spot. There's metered parking along Main Street. There's an existing couple of spaces that were dedicated to church use, and they're not currently metered. And what we're proposing to the planning board is that we would repurpose those as a drop-off location. It's already been set aside for the church.
Okay, as long as the plan's in place, thank you.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. David, can you put yourself on mute? There's a lot of echo. Okay. I'm sorry, I've been having a really rough time with the connection throughout the presentation, but at least I got myself off of mute. I'm just checking to see if you could hear me. David, there was a question from Commissioner Corbo about the slate roof removals and replacements, and I didn't quite hear your answer. I'd like to know what percentage of I understand that the majority of the complex has asphalt shingle to start with. Which building has the slate, and what's the percentage of slate you're removing, and are you replacing it all back? I need a little more clarification. I think I was not able to hear everything you said before.
Okay, and hopefully you can hear me okay.
I do.
This is the roof plan. Brian, can you show the area of slate roof on it with your cursor? That area is slate roof, and the area to the back towards Yancey Street is slate. Approximately 35% or so needs to come out due to conditions and or the need to remove it in order to rebuild the gutters and flashings. At that extent of replacement, it is always recommended to do an entire new roof. We have a compelling structural issue, and that is the weight of the roof. And we are doing everything we can to reduce it, to limit the outward forces of the structure. So we were proposing to replace it with asphalt shingles, substantially lighter in weight, but we still will be adding piers to the side because it's essential to provide the lateral stability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So David, while we're on the roof plan, I'm looking at the area that we just observed where the slate is located, and right now you're calling out for the mechanical units, right? I guess that's for the new centralized system that would go throughout the structure. How much of that will be exposed from the pedestrian level, would you imagine?
Well, actually, this is the valley here. There is nothing that is totally hidden.
Okay, fantastic. Just wanted to
We're trying to get as many as we can. There will be some, for the church, there's an enclosed area proposed on the north. We can show you that in the site plan. And some will need to be on the upper roof area of the memorial hall, screened but not entirely by the parapets. We have no site at all except to a little bit to the south, and then some to the north above the retaining wall. So we're doing our best and feel we've really accommodated that well. But the ones you specifically asked about, not visible at all.
Okay, so from pedestrian level, we won't see that. We'll basically see the roofing material as you walk around the building for the most part.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So this is Gianfranco. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about uses.
Dave, can you put your phone on mute, please? Thank you.
Again, I'm not sure if I missed something during the presentation. I remember in the plans I saw the sanctuary was shown in reuse as an auditorium. And I understand that there's work that needs to be done in the fellowship hall and other portions of the historic building. I understand the location of the bathrooms in a central location. I understand the addition of the curtain wall, glass curtain wall lobby area. Was there anything discussed about the uses of the other spaces other than the sanctuary? Like, you know, I mean, my visuals are going nuts. I'm sorry to tell everyone, but on the plan we see, you know, the auditorium, but then we see a lot of blank spaces. Are these supposed to be programs for you know, classrooms or just open space, or is that something you're not talking about right now that's being developed? Please explain.
Yeah, hi John Franco, this is Mike Cassidy, and I heard your question, so I'll articulate. So we are developing the different uses for the inside of the entire facility currently. I can tell you what we are working with now and what our plans are. As you said, inside the former sanctuary space, we're intending to make that a kind of local community theater where schools and local theater and or dance groups or other community organizations could use to put on shows. David very specifically mentioned that the seating in the sanctuary space would not be fixed seating, so that space could also be used for other multi-purpose reasons. Once as we look to develop the programming, that's the intention of that flexibility. You mentioned the lobby main entrance, the addition, which is being used to, you know, level all of the floors and create one means of egress. That's what that use would be for the addition. When you go to Fellowship Hall on the left, we're envisioning a interactive kind of exhibit space for youth. This is kind of just thinking at the current times, we're just developing these ideas of potentially installing exhibits that are going to, you know, tell some interpretive stories about Patterson's past and have them placed there. We feel that that could be a nice complementary use to a kind of community youth theater. But again, those ideas are just being developed currently, but it is a nice open space that we feel could offer that potential. In Memorial Hall, which is the center building, where we do have an existing basement, an existing first floor, and an existing second floor. We know that at the existing second floor, we're very much leaning towards making that a makerspace lab. You know, somewhere where students can practice STEM and STEAM learning and have experience there in the makerspace kind of realm of things, which I'm sure you guys have heard about. It would be again focused on youth activities there. On the first floor, where the plan currently says bookstore, that really is just a placeholder at this point. At one point, we had thought that maybe would be like a bookstore / kind of literacy center where STEM activities were happening on the second floor, and on the first floor, we were complementing that with kind of reading and writing activities. I think we're now more leaning towards that being an extension of the interactive exhibit space. But again, these ideas are just being thought out. In the basement, the idea is that that basement central area, Memorial Hall, can kind of serve as like a small multi-purpose cafeteria. Let's say that a couple classes from elementary schools come for a field trip, that'd be a place that they could, you know, have their lunch or put their book bags down. If there happened to be, you know, private requests for, you know, a birthday party at this facility, maybe that's where they're doing kind of the eating and the cake cutting. And there's actually a stairwell coming up from the basement to the back of the sanctuary space, which could provide this opportunity to use it as kind of like a backstage of sorts for your small theater shows, where, you know, folks would go to change in between sets or bring up different sets. So those are our thoughts. Again, they are just being developed, but I wanted to give you as much of our thinking as I can at this point.
Mike, this is Chair Tate. So just kind of to expound on what you were just saying, I'm looking at the interactive exhibits activity space. And I understand that you guys are in design development and moving through sort of the more detailed uses of the program. Do you imagine that the interactive space would be kind of open? Because I think it's interesting that you have the intersection of the gable happening there, and there's this kind of, T-shaped openness in the plan. Do you imagine that that would be compartmentalized to any degree? I understand that you guys are still kind of figuring out the micro uses of the space as you further the design intent for.
Our current thinking is to definitely show to open up the ceiling so that you can see the ceiling from the underside. With regards to creating partitions, if you will, inside that T-shaped space, we're thinking against that at the moment. What the exhibits themselves, as if you've been to, and I'm sure you have, museums and places where they have exhibit space, a lot of times the exhibits themselves kind of create that separation.
Right.
The other, changes in the flooring or the exhibit itself might kind of change, act as kind of a separation. That's our thinking at the moment. We have not yet proposed any interior walls inside that space.
Thank you. I think it's interesting because that's a vast transition between those two volumes, and I'm just curious to see how that is manifested long term. But thank you for answering that question.
Yeah.
This is Jeff Rocco. Mike, I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay.
To what you had mentioned about where I'm been focusing sort of on uses here. Let me start with I don't think any time during the presentation it was mentioned about the technical parts of the planning application with regard to there's a use code. I understand this might have been all, let's say, religious assembly as a use code. Is the use code being requested to change? And also, without the partitioning or the showcasing of the specific uses in these volumes, for example, were you really able to calculate the egress distances? And is there going to be a need for additional egress locations that are not being shown now? This is something that we typically get in an overall reuse plan. We sometimes see the need for extra doors or changing doors into windows into doors, situations like this. But I didn't hear any of that addressed during the presentation. That's my second question. I'm not sure how you can tackle a planning review at the planning board without this kind of detailed information for interior uses. There was a question about variances with regard to parking, bus drop-off, things like that. That's another question that going to the planning board you should be prepared to talk about. My fourth question has to do with the sanctuary. We just did a review last meeting for Temple Emanuel on Broadway, which is another religious ecclesiastical building that has, not as complex as this one, but it has an incredibly intact sanctuary. And there was a lot of pre-meeting and during the meeting discussion about the seating and the maintenance of the interior of space in its authentic condition. I don't remember if anything was mentioned during the presentation about your treatment of the sanctuary. This is a key concern to the Preservation Commission. They need to know what changes are proposed on the interior specifically for the sanctuary. And you mentioned that seating might be an issue. For example, if we have 6 pew seating now, what you're showing is individual seating. Are you proposing to remove all those seats? Those are the kinds of questions I'd like you to address now.
Okay. Thank you, Gianfranco. I think for some of them, I will have to defer to David Abramson. So I will, David, if you're listening here, I will lead in with my initial responses to Gianfranco's questions. And then if you can fill in, especially around things like use code and distance to egress, and the discussion about the queues, which is something we went into depth with New Jersey Historic Trust on. Just on the your first question, Gianfranco, about the different uses and are we prepared in terms of, you know, number of egress doors and distances and stuff. I do know that CTS has done that work. The way we have planned for it is that we've regarded the sanctuary space as kind of a theater space, and there are obviously occupancy and parking requirements connected to theater spaces. For the fellowship hall, we've calculated that based on it being assembly. For the upstairs, for the first floor in Memorial Hall, I believe that's also assembly. And then the second floor where I talked about the makerspace, that is being for a classroom because we feel a makerspace lab most closely will mimic a classroom in terms of parking and occupancy counts. So those are the basis for which we came up with the parking site plan calcs, which are included in our application to the planning board. It does show a need for a parking variance. I'll tell the commission here, when you put those numbers together, comes up with a shortfall of about 161 parking spaces. As you can see, there was never any parking available on the site. So while the prior use may have not been granted a variance just because of the age of the development, you know, if the facility had continued to, you know, operate in its current size, I imagine any use of it would result in obviously a parking variance because there is no on-site parking available. I think those are, and then you discussed the treatment of the sanctuary, which is also something that I think David can respond best to because we went into some of that detail in the preservation plan. David, are you able to offer responses to that?
Yeah, sure. Regarding egress, yeah, we looked at it. We haven't done a detailed study, but it looks, everything that's there looks as to accommodate what we need through the various means of egress. We don't propose any additional ones, and you know, typically when we go in for the building permit, that's where we provide the detailed egress diagrams. Regarding the seating, we looked and talked in great length internally as well as with the trust. In order to make this space function for its, you know, a proposed new use and one which has some economic viability, which is critical, we need a flexible space. What we included in the preservation plan is a commitment to both study in a little greater detail the cues that are there, which appear old but not co-eval with the construction of the building, and then to find locations throughout the facility for a number of them, no commitment on the number, so that they could still exist, although not in their current locations, to enable us to have the flexibility, but to provide a link with that path.
John Franco, were those responses complete to your questions? Or if you have any?
Yes, thank you very much. Specifically, no mention about stained glass window or any of the, I would call them precious artifacts that are on the inside of the sanctuary. For example, there's a lot of different historical plaques that memorialize the donation of certain parts of buildings. There's plaques placed to Mary Ryle, etc. What's the plan for those artifacts with the stained glass, please?
I can answer that. Franco, the stained glass window, on stained glass windows, it's very important for us to restore those as best we can, and I believe that we've already asked a specialist in that area to begin looking at it so that we can move in that direction. And with respect to the plaques and other artifacts, they will all be preserved, maybe not in their current locations, but we intend to salvage those because we understand the historic value of them.
Thank you, Bob. All right, thank you for answering those questions. Mike Cassidy, you didn't mention it, but I think you did mention it, and somewhere in the package that we saw. I just want to say it out loud so people are not left hanging. But there's the mall, which is a block away or a block's walk, I guess you call it, from the facility. Sort of blessed with this idea that we can park a lot of cars there for events and parking matters with regard to the use of the space for assembly or for performing arts. A lot of people need to come and park if they're coming from out of town, for example. But I believe that's the direction that you're headed with regard to taking care of the parking needs. Is that right?
Yes, John Franco, thank you. That is the direction we're thinking about heading in. We have not arrived at, a fixed number agreement with the parking authority or the mall around what number of spots may be available. But that we're thinking in line with what you just expressed is that parking facility could provide assistance in our shortfall with the on-site parking we don't have.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions. Thank you very much, guys.
Mike, I have one more question for you guys. This is Chair Tate. This is just a point of clarification, not necessarily in our purview, but considering the history of the building, do you guys imagine that you would introduce like a new sprinkler system into the structure? I know that you guys are upgrading the system. This was just more of a question.
That's absolutely. It will be introduced.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you very much. I see Commissioner Walter's hand up. Do you have a question? Rich?
Again, I forgot to put it down after my last comment. But since you asked, I just want to mention with the performing arts in the sanctuary area there, you got my wife is into performing arts for kids, so you have to think of a makeup rooms, changing rooms, places to store props, things like that.
Rich, that's a great point. Thank you. This is Mike Cassidy. That's one of the reasons we're glad to find that there's a stairwell. If you're looking at the sanctuary space, you can see a door heading out to right there to the rear and a stairwell. That stairwell takes you down to that basement floor. What we're hoping to kind of be a multi-purpose space in there. It has extra closet space. Are thinking that can kind of function as the backstage, if you will, so that in between acts and sets, that's where folks would go to change or store their props.
This is John Bronco again. Rich's comment stimulated me to think about asking you this question. I heard David's explanation about the pews in the sanctuary and the need for flexible seating, and the discussion about with the historic trust that David, I believe, was the entity that funded the preservation plan. So I'm sure that there was a lot of discussion with them about these same preservation topics, and I'm grateful for that because, as you mentioned in the presentation, that's the purpose of a preservation plan, to address exactly these kinds of questions about reuse of the building and how the treatments will be handled both on the interior and exterior. My question is, again, I'm reflecting, this is for the benefit of the commissioners as well. The last discussion that we had about Temple Emanuel, we reported to the planning board that there was a commitment from the owner to maintain the interior space intact and in its authentic condition. and to not alter it, with exception of the seating, which was the same topic really that you're bringing up here again. A lot for the same reasons as well, frankly. So aside from the seating, would there, Rich Walter also just brought up the idea of when you use a former altar that happens to be a kind of a small one in this sanctuary, if my memory serves me, you start to have issues with having to hang lights and having to have areas where the actors can wait to get on stage or quit changing and so forth. This is all sort of backstage room, and to some degree, I might expect that there would need to be some changes to the interior space in order to accommodate all of those other activities in the reuse plan. Would it be, so with all that in mind, would it be an issue if there was a condition tonight to the planning board that you would make a commitment to maintain the integrity of the sanctuary space, in its authentic condition, aside from the moving of the pews? That's my question.
John Franco, this is Bob. I do think that we're going to make every effort to retain things as they are, but I think we may need a little bit of flexibility in that regard in order to carry out the intended purposes. Nothing that I think would be significant. No one will walk into this space and say, my goodness, it's so dramatically different from how it used to be. But I think we're going to need a little bit of flexibility in that regard.
Thanks, Bob. I'm glad we was able to put this question now before the commission gets into discussion, because I can see that might be something they'd want to know about with regard to your intentions. As a reminder, again, referring back to last month's review, I pointed out in my presentation about the project that under the preservation ordinance and the zoning ordinance, we have purview under for unique and authentic assembly spaces, interior spaces, specifically in ecclesiastical buildings like this is one, and the Temple Emanuel was another. So this is the point of my question, because I know that the Preservation Commission will be interested in helping to assure that the integrity of the interior is maintained to the largest degree possible. So that's why I'm asking that question. I'm sure that we'll have a little more discussion about it during our discussion period. Thank you.
Hi, this is Chair Tate. I have a final question. So if you look on the screen right now, you notice above the proposed lobby, there are currently, in this rendering, in the SketchUp rendering that we see here, there are 8 skylights above the lobby. Can you scroll to sheet 104? And in your rendering, or in your plan here, you're showing 5. I'm just wondering which one supersedes the other. I understand sometimes there's inconsistencies with design development as you move through. In the plan here, it appears that these skylights are directly above the staircase leading to the basement. Can you confirm if you're going to do it all the way across in a symmetrical style per the rendering? Or will it just be the 5 directly above the staircase leading down to the basement?
This is Brian Comptroller with CTS. I can answer that. It would be as shown in the renderings here, all the way across.
Okay. Thank you for your confirmation.
Okay.
Do we have any additional questions from the commissioners for the applicants? If we don't have any questions, I'd like to kind of move to the resolution statement of purpose. Tim, do we have a resolution stating purpose for this particular project?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. Resolution 21-09 directs the Executive Director of the Historic Preservation Commission to prepare a memorandum containing the Commission's recommendations for the Planning Board or the Board of Adjustment regarding the property located at 318-330 Main Street, Patterson, New Jersey, Block 4708, Lot 1.
Thank you, Tim. Do we have a motion for the prepared resolution? And a second from the commissioners?
Moved it.
Okay,
And second by Mohammed.
okay. Tim, did you get that?
Correct. Commissioner Corbo moved for it and Commissioner Ahmed with the second.
Thank you. So now the resolution is on the floor and we're open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, before we get started with discussion, can I ask Brian Convertor, can you please put the rendering back up on screen? So while we're discussing, the rendering will be there for people to reference, please.
Confirmed.
Okay, I'm going to put I'm going to ask the presenters to also please put yourselves on mute so we can avoid any feedback and what have you. If you're not already there, I mean, my video is not feeding very well right now, so I'm not even sure, but I just wanted to ask. Thank you. Those are the only housekeeping things. So, commissioners, please, if you have discussion, please bring it.
All right, so I'm going to start off. This is Chair Tate. First thing I would say is I think this is a very ambitious project, and I think that the designer and the applicants, really scrutinized the existing structure. They looked at the fabric of the materials and some of the areas that needed work, and they addressed. They carefully observe where the physical building could be, rehabilitated to bring it back to a useful, not only aesthetic, but architectural value. But I also, just to kind of move further into that, I appreciate this is beyond, our scope of what we can bring to the table, but the idea that this is for the youth, this is another component, another machine for the city to elevate the culture within. I think the architecture, I like the fact that they separated the historic from the addition, like per the interior standards. They made a clear delineation between what was added to the building, and it's not invasive. The lines are very clean. You can tell the difference between the historic structure and new. The fact that they're introducing new systems into the building to make it more sustainable long term is added value. And then Bob Jarashi clearly stated that they're currently working with people to look at the stained glass, which I think is just kind of, when you do that, that's just a beautiful addition to a structure like this. And I like the project. I think it fits within the guidelines. Obviously, we're not looking at it that detailed at the moment because it's a planning review, but that's my take on it. I see Commissioner Corbel's hand raised. Commissioner Corbel?
You're on mute, Commissioner Corbo.
I think her hand went down, but I do see Commissioner Walters' hand up.
Yes, I just want to remark that this is a project that I think is going to enhance the lives of many people in the city of Patterson. It's a great project. I like the design overhaul. My only little concern is the sanctuary and what's going to happen to it. So that's something that we'll have to discuss in the design review.
Thank you, Commissioner Walter. I did see a message from Commissioner Corbo. She's having technical difficulties with unmuting, but she does have a question, and we'll see if we have any other commissioners, and we'll get Commissioner Corbo's question in a couple minutes. We'll get it shortly. Are there any other?
Mr. Chair, it's the Jeff Franco. There's another question that's come up offline that I think I need to clarify for the benefit of our. We have several people on the commission who are employees of the county, and the question is posed to Mr. Jirashi. We know that, as you said in the beginning of your presentation, the project is part of the ERG proposal that includes the Great Falls or the Alexander Hamilton Visitor Center, and this project as well. Now, we know that the County of Passaic was asked to, or the Improvement Authority, I believe, was asked to provide bond funding for the parking deck portion of that project. So, in your opinion, if I could ask you, sir, does the county's involvement with the parking deck also, kind of mean that that the county is involved with funding of this project from a paper point of view, or I understand there's no county funding in this project at all, but would you please clarify that, please?
Sure. Well, to the extent that your question may be trying to ascertain whether or not a conflict of interest could potentially exist with commissioners that are affiliated with the county, legal counsel would probably be more qualified to answer that than I am. But to the extent that your inquiry is just more of a general nature, I can tell you that there's been considerable progress made with the county in the context of guaranteeing the ERG dollars that would be flowing into the project through the Improvement Authority. However, there's still more work to be done in that regard. So, there will be county involvement through the Improvement Authority. Whether or not that triggers anything with respect to conflict of interest for the commissioners, I'm not necessarily qualified to answer that.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask it to you this way: if the Passaic County Improvement Authority funding does not come through for the larger ERG project, does that also mean your funding is compromised for this part of the ERG?
What I would say is that it means that we would have to be a little bit more creative in terms of where the money would come from to do a project that we estimate will be in the $10 million range. However, what I would say is that we're in a strong position to do this project, even if, in the very unlikely event, that those ERG tax credit dollars do not materialize. We would just be charged with fundraising in a more traditional sense, and also potentially having to cut back the scope of what we're proposing a little bit. So that's very much hypothetical at this point, and but our intent would be to go through with this regardless and preserve it as best we can with the funding that we do have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jirachi. I apologize for not asking these questions prior to the meeting tonight. This is something that probably we should have talked about before. But since we're here, we should talk about it for the benefit of our commissioners who are, county employees who may be wondering this right now. To Mr. Jirachi's point, again, I'm not the attorney for the board, but I do know that the TCIA, or the funding source that we are talking about here, is the Passaic County Improvement Authority. The word authority means they are not, they're a creature of the county, but they are not under the governance of Passaic County, nor do the folks that are our commissioners are not employees of the Passaic County Improvement Authority. So that's the information I can sort of provide, and we are allowed as commissioners to weigh what we know about the application and the various moving parts, and make a decision on our own with regard to ethical considerations of refusal to finally when we vote on this. So I invite our commissioners who are employed by the county to think about this and then sort of exercise your best judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Bob Jirachi. I just want to extend the invitation for the commissioners to voice their observations or thoughts on what was said, or we're still open for discussion. I'd like to get as much contribution as possible so that we can not only get answers for ourselves internally, but also prepare the applicant for any questions in the future that may come up with our review in the future, or their subsequent planning board review. I see Joyce's hand is still up. Let's see if she can get her audio to work.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. I just needed some clarification, and I guess it's really directed at our executive director, John Franco. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. This is a local designation currently. Is it also on the New Jersey Historic Register or not?
No, this is not a listed building on the national or state registers. There was an effort a long time ago to nominate for the state and national registers, but there was some issues with the initial application. The issues were not corrected, so the application did not move on. So it consequently did not get its formal designation. However, with that said, the document I showed in the very beginning was called a Certificate of Eligibility, which is a formal document from the Preservation Office saying this building would qualify to be listed individually as an individual building on both the state and national registers. And that certificate is an important document because it goes a long way to putting the foot in the door, so to speak, of eligibility. So with regard to tax credits, or with regard to applying for funding, the certificate of eligibility for individual listing is enough to get a building started. So although it's not formally listed, to answer your question, it's sort of halfway there, and the building, the nomination could be reinvigorated or restarted, and would probably have no problem, getting over that curve, if that's what's either required by a funding source, because some funding sources do require that, or if the owners wish to pursue it, that's another thing that would be voluntary at this point. However, with the municipal designation, the Preservation Commission's review, what we're doing now is, on the books, and this is what we're here for. So those, the same preservation review would be binding on the owners, going forward into construction and so forth. And of course, this is, why the preservation plan was done, and also, why we're doing the review and so forth. So we're, again, very very pleased to be here doing this review on the basis of the municipal designation.
Okay, thank you. So then my second part of the question was, so anything that we approve or whatever's being done in terms of the renovations and the additions and the rehab and the adaptive use would not preclude this designation for state or national later on if it was headed in that direction, either by us or by the owners. Is that correct?
Well, that's an excellent point. In fact, any modifications to the building that are proposed from its condition, now, like again, let's go back to 2001. As I stated before, this building this site has been in stasis for about 15 years, and that was evidenced by the preservation plan and by Mr. Abramson's presentation of all the deficiencies of the building. So we could conclude that over a period of 15 years, we haven't seen any major change to the building or repairs to the building. So the document that assessed its eligibility with regard to integrity in 2001 likely still applies because there have been no major modifications or changes to the conditions of the building. In fact, the conditions have gotten sort of more deteriorated rather than kind of compromising it from actual adaptive reuse changes. So this would be the first large-scale adaptive reuse proposal since then, and we have seen in tonight's presentation there are a significant or overwhelming amount of the work proposed is for preservation purposes in accordance with the Secretariat standards, and it would not be seen as detrimental to a future designation on the state or national register. However, with that said, some of the other interventions, for example, the addition of the lobby, the glass curtain wall lobby, the removal of anything from the sanctuary, like the pews, for example, those are factors that would have to be taken into consideration as part of the nomination going forward. Now, would those changes necessarily sink the nomination? I couldn't say. I couldn't say from this level whether or not they would sink the nomination. However, there would be interventions that would need to be taken into consideration that were not made prior to the nomination, but would be made like after the changes were done. They would be part of the nomination. They'd be part of describing, what's going on with the building. So I would, from my opinion, I guess I think I should sum up by just giving you my opinion. My opinion is that these changes are being made in concert with the standards and would most likely be acceptable with regard to any funding sources that are using preservation guidelines, let's say the National Tax Credit or the New Jersey Historic Trust. These kinds of interventions we've seen are best practices with regard to preservation policy, and I think there would be a high likelihood that with the changes, the building will still be accepted for inclusion on the register. However, I cannot be the authority to say that that's entirely the case.
Well,
that's an excellent question.
Thank you. I just thought it was something that we should consider. Thanks.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Walter's hand is up. Do you have a question?
Okay, I gotta get used to putting it down after I talk, okay?
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments for the open floor discussion at the moment for the resolution that's currently on the floor? Executive Director, can you confirm if